You are listening to the NPH Hour here on News Talk Saga 960 AM. I'm your host, Jason Thom, and while the focus of this show is on the men's side of the Canadian national program, I want to remind everyone that the women's program start their quest for the podium at the Tokyo Olympics on July 26th. And the competition window for that event carries all the way through to the weekend of August 7th and 8th if they make it to the medal round. So that is a lot of time for Canada's entire sporting community to get behind our women's team. Canada's group includes Korea, Serbia, and Spain. Now, at the Olympics, there are no easy games, and Spain is currently ranked third in the world, one spot above Canada, who is currently ranked fourth, which is the highest ranking they have ever held. And for listeners of this show, you know that the build to this point started when they won a last-chance qualifier to get into the 2012 London Olympics. Capitalizing on that opportunity changed the trajectory of the women's program forever. That was about a decade ago. And it's an example of what winning the Victoria qualifier could have meant for Canada's men's program. But instead, we are back to a waiting period. And with more media than ever covering basketball in this country, it has been interesting to see the response to this loss on social media, where there is Raptors Twitter and basketball Twitter from a blog standpoint and from individuals who are just passionate about the sport. They are upset. But the mainstream media has been rather subdued. And maybe it's because everyone knows the future for the sport in Canada is so bright. So why pile on? Why make things worse for a program that is hurting right now? But for those that have covered this program for so long and the people who are involved in the basketball community, it's a little more serious to see yet another loss hold the men's senior team back. And one of those people who has been in the grassroots community for over 10 years now is my next guest, and he is the person who helped start North Bowl Hoops back in 2010. And joined now by the CEO of North Bowl Hoops, Tariq Sbiet, who's been following this national program for over a decade now. And let's talk about the good, Tariq. Some players really stepped up in this tournament. Some were playing for the senior team for the first time, like Nickeil Alexander-Walker, Luguentz Dort. And I mean, Dort a few years ago was on the B team practicing against the senior squad. So, what did you see from those guys and others in general?
The big question mark coming into it from an NBA perspective was, of course, was Andrew Wiggins going to play? He did. And then if he was going to play, what type of Andrew Wiggins were we going to get? And I think anybody that was watching the national team for the first time in a long time would see that he is as good as everyone says he is, but there's more. And I feel that it was a good development opportunity for him. He's still only about 26 years old. So I think this is the first time we have to remember that Andrew's in an environment where he's looked at as the guy. It's been the first time in 5-6 years, maybe since Kansas. So I think that's important for his development. I saw something different, I saw his competitive spirit in a lot of different moments where he was just clapped his hands or pumped his fist and he really wanted to win. He really wanted to make the Olympics. So I thought that was interesting and cool. It will be cool to see how that translates back into his NBA career from a leadership development standpoint. RJ was RJ. He's the most consistent that we've grown to know through the national program and outside the national program. But I thought Nickeil was a I don't think it was a pleasant surprise to me because I know how good he is and just he doesn't have quite the same type of opportunity as other NBA guys in terms of being the guy or the franchise player. He's kind of had to build his way into the NBA, averaged nearly double digits this year, but he was great for the national program. I thought he provided that extra offensive punch and being arguably our best shooter as well. Just a playmaker, a guy that you can put the ball in his hands. He can create for himself and create for others, get to the line or hit from the perimeter. So I thought that was great. And then Luguentz, it's crazy to think that was his first national team experience. And so, he's not only an NBA guy, but he's a great role player for this team And just he had no more than 5 points a game, he'll still make an impact on the floor defensively. We need a guy like that, perimeter oriented defender. So those things were cool to see for the average fan of Canadian basketball. Just to see the NBA guys actually wear the red and white, and a good chunk of them. We had 8, I believe. So, I mean, those were all positive things, and they performed individually, from Wiggins to RJ to Nikhil. Those are our top 3 guys, but obviously we fell short collectively.
Yeah, and I mean, a short camp, no exhibition games going into that tournament as well. You could argue that a lot of that had to do with COVID and the pandemic and everything along those lines. But, there was also some questions of some guys who are in the NBA who weren't able to play or weren't available, some of the high-level guys from overseas. And so, I mean, the big thing that I've been thinking about is it time to change the way we do this? We've always been waiting to get all the NBA guys on the roster, and that was going to solve all the problems. But I think what we may be seeing is that that's not going to solve all the problems. Number one, it may never happen due to contracts and injuries and stuff like that. But even if we do get them all, if we don't have time to practice, if you don't have time to play in games before the tournament, does it really help? And the thought that I had was, we always talk about how good our international players are, the ones playing overseas. So what if we identified 6 to 8 of those guys and worked with their agents, worked with their pro teams, maybe had them here in the CEBL in the summertime, and ensured that they were always available for these windows, like it was worked into their contracts, and then just placed in NBA guys, say 4, maybe 5, and had them in particular positions, 2 guards, a wing, a big or 2. But then depending on who was available contract-wise and injury-wise, we just plugged them in. Like, do you think maybe that is the way to tackle this going forward?
I think a hybrid model makes sense, in the sense of we're not America. As much as proximity wise, we want to, we look at them as the bar and we try to chase the States and everything we do. We don't have a couple hundred NBA guys, and no matter what, you're going to get them. But also the time period side of things, when we're not qualifying for the Olympics, and when we're doing, whether it's the Worlds or the Americas, like the games that were played then really are a waste, because it's a completely different team. So definitely, to find the solutions, I think addressing the problems are important. And for sure, one of many problems are the lack of continuity. That was clear. But also, one thing we know is that a problem isn't talent. Talent comes from the NBA. Talent comes from high level overseas. And I think the reason why we know the problem isn't talent is because we had all the talent here. We had the most talented team in the tournament and on paper in the world outside of America. And we haven't qualified for the Olympics in 20 years. So this is a major, major problem because of what it creates in terms of our global reputation. If you're just tuning in as a Canadian and you're not in tune with the history, you're just looking like, oh, that was a tough game. We almost won it. But if you look at it from a multiple decade perspective, it's really embarrassing at this point, and it's simply unacceptable. So meaning that we all have to identify the problems and find the solutions. I think what you presented is definitely something that makes logical sense in terms of it being a hybrid model, because we do need continuity, and that's one way that it could provide that.
I mentioned you've been following the team for over a decade. There was a time where there was only a handful of people at these Canada basketball practices. You were one, I was another. Obviously, the Doug Smith, Michael Grange, Laura Ewings, NBA TV. There was obviously, I'd say about 10 that were kind of always around the program, but now there's just a much brighter spotlight on them. With Raptors, basketball, Raptors, Twitter, everything along the line. So there is a lot being thrown around out there of what needs to change. And I think that's a good thing, right? There's more spotlight there to ensure that going forward, there is accountability. But at this point, what can that accountability look like, really? Right? If Nick Nurse, for example, was non-committal about coming back right off the top, if he steps aside now, we're left with a huge hole on the coaching side. And then, Roland Barrett Sr., I mean, obviously he's connected to RJ, who's one of our best players and will be playing for us for the next 15 years. So is it like a tough spot right now for Canada basketball and what you need to do? And people don't want to hear, well, we'll go get him in 2024. People don't want to hear that, but really, like, that's all there is at this point, right?
It's definitely a tough spot, and it's going to be tough decisions that need to be made. Difficult decisions, difficult conversations need to be had to start, and the people don't want to hear that. And people also don't want to hear, oh, wait till we have all our NBA guys. And then if we have all our NBA guys and we still lose, this is not a time to point fingers at any one individual, because in my opinion, this is larger than one individual, both from a blame standpoint and from a success standpoint. This should be a we thing, not a me thing, not an individualistic approach to this, because there isn't one individual that you could solely blame for Canada not making it to the Olympics for 20 years. This, I believe, is a culture piece. I think that's huge, is setting a culture at the very top of the spectrum. In this case, when we talk about the top of the spectrum of Canadian basketball, Canada Basketball as an organization is one of those leadership organizations. The CEBL is now emerging into another organization that when we look at Canadian basketball, we look for leadership, but that's where we look. And at the top, I believe it's about setting a culture of togetherness and working together and cooperating together. Because when we set that tone at the top organizationally, it comes down to every level in the community. At the amateur level, at the club level, at the university level, and just the idea of and mindset and energy of cooperation. Like, we need to cooperate with each other if we're going to take Canada to the global level. And as a person in the industry that's been around long enough, and myself included, and I think you could speak to anybody in the industry on some real dialogue and real conversation, will tell you we're a fractured community. And at the end of the day, when Canada loses at that platform, we all lose. We all lose. We all feel it. We all get emotional about it. And we all have these conversations now when we lose. And yes, that is where you have the most difficult conversation, is when we lose, because we need to identify the problem or problems, because there are multiple problems, and then get into the solutions. For me, what I'm here to share with you and my perspective on it is, it's a culture. We have to change the culture of not Canada basketball simply as an organization, but the culture of Canadian basketball, that we can win, and we can win together, because we've done a lot as a country individually. We have produced 20 Canadian plus NBA players individually, everyone in their own sanctions, right? But we haven't had that crossover in terms of collaboration, real dialogue, and having that mutual respect for each other as professionals in this industry. Everybody in the community has something different to contribute. And I would love to see a Canada basketball that is inclusive, truly inclusive, because when I remember Steve Nash years ago, and Rowan and Jay Triano and that whole regime was introduced, the thing that stuck in my mind when Steve was speaking was how they were talking about inclusion. I don't think we have seen that with the national program. And I'm talking about outreach to different organizations in the community, all the players in the game, to be able to have say, to have a seat at the table. Not everyone's going to be a part of the leadership or the decision makers at the national program, but I think all the players need to feel like they're a part of it. Feel like they're contributing in some way, because at the end of the day, as Canadians, we all want to win.
What have it meant from the business of basketball in Canada, from the corporate level, to have both our women's and men's program in there in just a couple of weeks?
It's massive, but nothing's going to stop Canadian basketball from growing, but this certainly hurts the momentum at the corporate level. Because if I'm going to speak to somebody, a potential sponsor, an investor into Canadian basketball, the conversation changes. The conversation stays the same as it always has been, in terms of selling potential, selling upside, not selling production at that level. Because when we have our NBA guys at the Olympics, that's maximum visibility, that's maximum eyeballs, and that's what sponsors want to be attached to. Like, whether it's sponsorship and financial support for Canada basketball as an organization. I also know they get certain government support that if they do make the Olympics, but then also what that means for the rest of the community, for our pro league, for our amateur, for our university and college athletics, for every level of Canadian basketball, this impacts it because it makes the sell a little bit tougher to get people to believe that Canadian basketball isn't just coming. It's not just the golden generation. We have actually production at the highest level of the sport. We've done it at the NBA level, right? Now the league, the CBL is growing, and we're showing that we got high level pro league in our country. And we've done it on the women's side, right? They're in the Olympics, and the best of luck to them. If they can medal, that could hopefully offset the lack of men production. But that's that final level. And it happens to be at the highest level globally, which is key to this. And for Canada to be viewed as a global leader in the sport, we're not going to be able to get over that hump until we get success with the senior men's program.
Tariq Sbiet, CEO of North Pole Hoops, with a lot of passion that is felt through so many people, and we could see it on social media after this loss. And as you said, I mean, nothing's going to stop Canada basketball. This just slows the momentum. And, we talk about it here on the show consistently, how many great things that there are. We just need to get past this other bump in the road. But as you said, we need to have difficult conversations. And thank you for coming on and doing that. The NPH Hour will be back after this short break here on News Talk Saga 960 AM.